Hi, Michael Crow here, President, Arizona State University. I just really am very excited about this collaborative artist in residence opening event that we've got. This is our first public art commission between ASU, our art museum here, LACMA, and it's fantastic that the Diane and Bruce Halle Foundation has stepped up to help continue our deep commitment to light-based art. We have a long-standing and evolving relationship with Roden Crater and James Terrell, and all things inspired by his fantastic work. We really view light as the point of origin, the point of energy, the point of creation, the point that we move to and are led to and are inspired by and are impacted by and affected by. Leo Villareal has even a great quote: light has the universal power to connect people together. We really believe that. And so this development of this 3D camera to scan the inside and outside of objects to work together using advanced LiDAR techniques and so forth and so on, the bringing together of science and technology and light and art and so forth, bringing this all together. We're very excited about this. Here we are in the middle of this great pandemic, and we're still moving forward, still advancing. So we're very excited about that. And so this is an exciting day for us to, as some have suggested, to light this digital campfire, to keep light as an inspiration going forward. And so I couldn't be more excited about the opening of this exhibit and the opening of this experience, and look forward to engaging with all of you. And just want to say that at ASU, we're deeply committed to the arts, deeply committed to creativity, deeply committed to our relationship with LACMA, and deeply committed to this concept of light as a point of origin understanding for all of us. So thank you, and good luck.
Thank you. So good evening or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're from and where you're logging in for right now. It might even be good morning. Thank you to Dr. Crow for his introductory remarks. We're now going to switch over to present a special viewing of Point Cloud ASU, followed by a conversation with Michael and Leo. But because many of you can't be on site in Tempe to see the work in person, we thought we'd share a little glimpse of it and then invite you to come back. collective round of applause. That's incredible. And really, I'm sorry to tell you all that it doesn't do it justice with just the breathtaking the breathtaking experience that one has when their whole body is in front of it and sort of experiencing the ritual of going downstairs and seeing this beautiful piece. So thank you, bravo. Congratulations and welcome, Michael, back to ASU virtually and hopefully in person very soon. Just for everyone, this is a work that is a result of a joint collaboration between Los Angeles County Museum of Art and ASU. And this is while we want to congratulate Leo for this brilliance of work that we just think is iconic. And really, I feel such a pride of place when I see this. It's incredible. We also have to acknowledge all of the work and all of the teams and all of the funders, everyone who really committed to making this a reality. So first, I just want to thank Leo, your studio. Emily, Amy, and Emily have been incredible and just real true collaborators. I also want to thank the Diane and Bruce Halle Foundation. And I spoke with Mrs. Halle. Yes, can't wait to show this to her in person, but really the Halle Foundation has been instrumental in the life of ASU Art Museum in the Valley and indeed in globally with her commitment to the arts. And really, we could not have done this without her vision and commitment to ASU and the ASU Art Museum and the arts. We also want to thank Dean Tepper at the Herberger Institute and his Dean's Creativity Council, the Roden Crater Initiative, which we'll get into. Michael can talk a lot about that. Michael, your team at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art has been incredible, Zoe and everyone. And then we've got on site here at ASU, our curators, Jennifer Janicki, Heather Lineberry, Julio Morales, Brittany Corrales, and Megan Smiley, who made sure this happened along with Andrea and Kat, who are helping us today. And then we've got Bruce Neville, Ed Soltero, Karen Stryker, Abraham Pino, Perry Becker, and the team at Edge Construction. You got to thank the team too for making this a reality. And it's a rather long list, but that just goes to show how many people come around Leo's campfire to make these things happen. So again, congratulations. And we are just humbled and honored to have this work at the museum. So I'm going to forego any biographical introductions of you, Leo, and of you, Michael, because I safely assume that neither of you need introductions, and people are logging on here know and are great admirers of the both of you. So I'm going to just launch us straight into a conversation. We'll do that for about 30 minutes and then leave a few minutes at the end for some Q&A, if that sounds good. Leo, I can't wait to hear you discuss the production of the work, inspiration of Arizona, Terrell, Predoc, but I want to start with a question for Michael, and then maybe that will just segue into giving us a little bit of background of your work and then this work in particular. So Michael, when we first spoke of this joint commission, we talked about, you know, the Roden crater as being such an important part of our collaboration together, and Terrell as an artist's artist, someone who is his legacy will be his influence on so many other artist generations coming after him. But when we first talked about this, the first person that came to mind for you was Leo. Could you talk a little bit more about this and maybe your relationship with Leo, James, and how this all sort of came to be?
Sure. Well, Miki, you're the one who made all this happen. So the thank you really first and foremost is to you, because you've made it all work, and I cannot wait to see it. I mean, we're working with a little handicap here that we're not in front of it, we're not immersed in it. But Leo, by the way, as I was looking at it, I was like, where's the music? Only because the work connects to music, and later I want to ask you a couple of questions about that. I want to talk about synesthesia and how our senses connect. But Miki, I think it was partly, so James Terrell sometimes jokes about the fact that in the 60s, you know, he never made a painting. And this idea of an artist evolved. You know, the Mondrian was painting people, trees, and then it got more and more abstract and all of that. James Terrell studied perceptual psychology. And he kind of became an artist out of working in Pomona out of a completely different perspective. This idea of how we see rather than sort of what we see. And he made this art that was, without object, right? No physical object, and actually no market. And I think for those were heady days. And he'll often talk to me about the kind of expectations that the world was changing in art completely, like that everything was opening and that art would change fundamentally. And then I remember in the 80s and 90s, there would always be this idea, well, guess we went back to painting and sculpture. And you could see this kind of deflated disappointment in sort of those ideas that he would continue to make his work. And we can talk about his work a little bit, Leo, because I'm interested in your perspective on some of that and differences in different generations. But I will always say to him, like, no, actually, there's a lot of artists who have, taken bits and pieces of this idea of an art that is, experiential, immersive, and made of light, of your time and ongoing. And Leo, you're an artist who, I think one of the things that connected it is also Leo's work is squarely in the new generation, the digital, programmable, without object in that same sense. But we share this, this idea of being in Marfa together under a Western sky and desert and weather and nature. And in fact, that connects. And so one is to see that Terrell's work has kind of advanced ideas about that. And actually he works with digital technology now. But Leo, people might look at your digital technology, but I know it comes from like watching the clouds. So I thought that idea of like the desert and nature and kind of bringing those worlds together was a nice idea. That's part of what we've been thinking about in ASU with the Roden Crater Project. It's not that it's just about an artwork. It's actually about an opportunity to think differently, because that project engages everything, as we've talked about, from astronomy to indigenous cultures to cosmologies, really. And that's a lot of those themes are in your work, Leo. And I'd love for us to talk a little about that, both similarities and very different approaches you take. But Miki, I don't know if we should, I think Leo should tell us a little bit about, since we cannot be there in front of this work, I have had the privilege of being immersed in your work, Leo, in various occasions, so I can piece it together, what it feels like. But I wonder, probably would be good for those of us here, and there's a version of it running behind you, if you could, more than usual, talk us through a little bit what it is, so we can share that, since none of us are in front of it. Great. Except for Miki.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really, again, honored to have the opportunity to do this commission. And thank you, Miki, and to, Julio and Jennifer, and your team has been amazing. And Michael, it's been great thinking about ASU and all the amazing things that it's doing in collaboration with James Terrell and with LACMA. And so this has been a very exciting project for me. And it's what I'm here in my studio in Brooklyn, and I have an LED array that I used to kind of program the artwork from here, because I really wasn't able to go to Arizona. Normally I would be there on site programming and tweaking and tuning the piece, but we found a way to do that remotely, which has been part of the challenge with the pandemic of having to do these things. So what the artwork is called Point Cloud ASU. And it's 12 feet 6 inches tall by 3 feet 4 inches wide, and it's about 12 inches deep. And it's basically like a monolith shape, and it holds approximately on each side of it about 160,000 LEDs per side. So it's so you can still see the individual points, which is very important to me, the individual pixel. But it is more, higher resolution than my work was in the past. I started out making light sculpture in 1997, actually at the Burning Man Festival, when I couldn't find my way home at night. And I'd been there 3 years, and I created this beacon with 16 strobe lights, and 0 is off and 1 is on. And I was able to kind of program that. And I had this, epiphany of the combination of software and light and space, and the power of that to communicate, even with this very small amount of information. So it's been a while since then. A lot's happened, and So I've started this piece is composed of LED tiles. So in a way, it's a kind of ready-made material you could get to make like a video wall, although we're using it in a very specific way. So each pixel is important, and we write our own custom software, which we've been doing for over 20 years to create the pieces that I make. And my work has been very much committed to abstraction. So no images, no text, all just pattern and playing with the brain's compulsion to recognize pattern and to make meaning out of it. So it's, you know, what I think the really exciting part about the piece for ASU is the, you know, I was kind of blown away by Antoine Predoc's building. Not just kind of blown away, I was really taken, it was such a monumental work. And I've worked previously with Antoine on a courthouse in El Paso, Texas, where I did a piece in the lobby. So I got to go and meet him in Albuquerque many years ago and become familiar with his work. So I think thinking, well, what could we do to activate the building and to really study it? And the other thing that happened in my visit to ASU was this discussion of it being an academic environment, which I love. I really love working in places where there are young people and there are people studying computer science and architecture and engineering and art and all sorts of things, and creating these hybrid forms, which is what my work does. It blends these different disciplines together. And I think that it's particularly interesting for students to see that blending and the breaking down of these barriers, which we're seeing more and more. So I was thrilled with this opportunity to do something, and I said, okay, I'm going to do something really experimental that I've never done before, and I don't really know what that's, you know, how it's going to turn out. But and Miki and Julio were very positive about that, and they said that's perfect. That's exactly what we want you to do. So after seeing the building and the architecture, I thought I just learned about a company named Carta that does. That has an amazing camera that does LiDAR scans. And this, a friend of mine who started Color Kinetics way back when, came to my studio in New York by chance and said, oh, I just started this new company and let me show you this camera. So it's a handheld camera. Kevin Dowling, thank you very much for inspiring me with that. And he brought it around and you kind of move the camera around, but unlike a regular photographic camera or video camera, it's capturing 3D data. So it's capturing points. So points in space plus textures of those points. So that's where the idea of this point cloud comes from. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to use this technology at ASU and to scan the building in order to create a model of it? But it's different from your standard 3D model. It's this kind of very ephemeral set of data. So we took this data and we have, I think we did 2 scans. The interior scan was, I think, let's see here, the stats, 53,299,713 points of data that was gathered. And then we scanned the exterior as well, and that was 147 million points. So we took these data sets. We have these brilliant technologists and programmers that we work with in the studio, and they merged all that data and then started working with our own custom software to allow me to kind of move through that space. So in a sense, you can recognize the building at ASU, but I'm really interested in this lever between recognition and abstraction and sort of playing with that. So there are moments of recognition when you see it, but then it starts to blur and become this like abstract point and you're not quite exactly sure where you are. But there were all these ways of and I see the point cloud as a kind of a portal in the way that you can stand in front of it. I mean, it's surrounded by stairways. So it's on the main axis when you walk in the building and you come down and you come upon the piece and it's surrounded by these stairs. So there's this natural viewing place. You don't actually even have to come into the museum to see it, which I love, that it's almost this piece of public art that anyone can come and see. And that it allows you to kind of see through the building because you can recognize at certain points where you are and you see the actual artwork within the sequences of the piece, but then you're seeing with like almost like X-ray vision, you can see through the building in a way that you can't do with the naked eye. So in a way, it becomes this viewer and a way of kind of exploring the space and the building, and using the architecture as a almost as a set of boundaries and parameters in which the particles can fly through and to kind of reveal. Miki, you're absolutely right when you say that the video doesn't do it justice. My work is all about being present with these things, and the opticality of it, and the everything having to do with perception is very important to me. So that not really the representations of light, but under these circumstances, we do the best we can, and I hope that everyone will have a chance to come and see the piece in person and spend some time with it. And the other important part of it is that there's all the sequences are non-repeating, so it's randomized, and there are many parameters which don't repeat. So you're not looking at a loop of something and you can sort of see it and then go away. You can kind of continue to see new things in it, and there's a sense of preserving mystery to it, so that you can spend a lot of time with it and see it day after day. And so it's something that I think hopefully people will enjoy, and it will become part of the landscape of ASU.
I really can't wait to see it. And Leo, there's a lot of aspects of your description which not only make sense to me in terms of your previous work, engagement with architecture, but also some new ideas, which I'm interested in. I can see that one fantastic idea about, you said X-ray. I could see it even in the background, because at moments I couldn't tell what it was, and then at moments it's this building. And of course, then I imagine, well, it's in that building, and I know that building. And I think Mr. Predock is actually online with us, so deserves credit too as muse and inspiration there. But that idea of, I guess, in a way, it is sort of intended to create awareness of your being in place, right? Because so there's one thing I'm really interested in about seeing. So we know that there are certain cultures, if you're not trained to see a photograph, you actually can't read it. We think of it as being a natural description, but it's not. We have to learn to see a photograph as perspectival space had to be almost invented. Is it a discovery or an invention? Because it's a way of reading. And when you're talking about these LiDAR cameras, like a little bit like the light field cameras and things like this, is I actually think maybe in human evolution, our seeing is changing again. X-rays, which were invented in, around 1902, I always think have a lot to do with the invention of abstraction, because, between photography and X-rays, not only did you not need a painting to represent something in that way, but X-rays gave you this sense that actually you can see through things. So maybe the truth is on an inside. It's not an external manifestation. So I actually see a lot of that in this work, and because your work is about, like James Turrell's, it's about seeing and changing a sense of seeing. So I have this thought that we are in a generational shift. I don't know, it's not just three-dimensional, but that we see differently as the tools change that we used to see. Is that fair from your perspective? Do you think about that at all?
Yeah, I do. I think we're entering this. The camera is like, suddenly we're all carrying around these devices which gather all sorts of data more and more, and and we have all this kind of enhancement of photography, like high, the high dynamic range, where you take a picture, but the camera's actually capturing maybe even hundreds of pictures and combining all those things together to make these new things. So we're really extending and pushing out beyond what we can see into these other areas. And as we're beginning to get into virtual reality and augmented reality, we have these amazing tools for starting to capture the spaces that we're in, and then transmit space, which is very exciting. And I was working on VR stuff in the early 90s, and like 1994, I went out to work at Interval Research, which was a research lab in Palo Alto that Paul Allen started. And I wanted to go there and do virtual reality then, which was like a whole other thing. But I've always been interested in that idea of creating space. And but I realized that it was very empty and kind of lonely, these virtual spaces where there was no one there, and you're kind of in these empty spaces with like a few polygons or a sphere or something, and you're like, this isn't that interesting. And that's right around the time when I went to Burning Man, and I realized, wow, here are people building a city together and doing this creative stuff, which is a communal thing, and everyone together. So that's one of the really important parts to me, is that you can gather people and create, what I've called digital campfires that have that same experience as like when you are, looking at something. But the not being encumbered is really important to me, and not having to wear anything, put anything on, get into a special chair or any of this stuff, and just be able to, you can walk into ASU, you can walk there, and the piece is there. And then, I hope that provokes conversation and you start talking to the person next to you. But I'm interested in the other thing that happened to me at Burning Man was getting profoundly lost when I first went there, because I set up my tent and then I went off and then I couldn't find my tent. And I'm like, this is crazy. I'm 20 something, and I had this childlike sense of being lost, and I found it fascinating. There were no streets. There was only this Burning Man. Eventually I did find my tent and everything was fine. But that idea of disorientation was very interesting, and how we need all these cues, and we can create these new kinds of spaces in which you can explore and blur those lines and get lost and disoriented. And there's a sense of that in Point Cloud at ASU, that you're seeing it, you kind of lock on, and then it starts to blur out and you're like, oh, where am I? And then it starts to kind of fade from one thing to another. So it's a very fluid situation, and it's very softly transitioning from one moment to the next. And it's meant to feel it's meant to feel, I guess, enjoyable, pleasurable to look at light. As humans, we're kind of hard coded to respond to light. But I think that it is, and you're getting data, you're kind of creating a model in your head in the way that you see the data, and you're trying to put it together into this model. So it's actually interesting that this is the first time I'm actually using an actual model of a space in a piece. And it's sort of kind of coming full circle in a way, and leading people on this journey, taking them somewhere, and to actually be in the space. This was created specifically to be shown at ASU. So you're standing in front of the piece that's about the space you're in, and can that change your perception of it? So I think that would be super interesting to, just see how people look at it after they're done with this, and they go back and look at the building and they're like, oh yeah, there's this thing that I saw, or this alignment. And there's a lot going on in this building. I think it's, Mr. Predock was inspired by all sorts of historic architectural sites, and many things which are embedded in the building. So it's very interesting, and I think this sort of created an opportunity to explore that, and to kind of show people some things that they may not necessarily see right off the bat.
I think that the other thing too is, when we talk about Predock's work, we talk about procession and processional, the going down the stairs, up the stairs, moving around in a way that also that word has been used for Terrell. And I think that one of the things that was really important is the peripheral. Like when you see an image just, in front of you, you think that you're reading all of that. But in the case of your work, Leo, a lot of your work, but this work in particular, it really is about sort of proceeding downstairs and upstairs and seeing the work live around you and behind you, and experiencing the night sky and the building, and all of that is really part of the legibility of the work. And I think it's also interesting to note that you were raised in Marfa and El Paso, and the skies, the sense of openness and wonder, and your body in space is something that I wonder if you were always in tune with, even early on.
Yeah, I was born in Albuquerque. My dad was in grad school there, and then we moved back to actually Wallis. My dad's family's from Chihuahua, and my mom's family's from West Texas, actually from Marfa. My great-great-grandfather settled there in the 1880s and became one of the founders of Marfa. So it was very interesting for me, growing up there and always being in the West. But my first trip to New York, I said, this is where I want to live. And it was a very powerful magnet. So I've, loved being here, but I've also loved being able to go back to Texas and to Marfa in particular. When I was in college studying initially art history. I didn't know I wanted to be an artist, but I realized that Donald Judd was in Marfa, and I kind of had to sit down. I was like, oh my God, this is so crazy. This collision of family history and art history. And it was really exciting. And I managed to go to some of the open houses that Judd had way back when he was still living, and with the bagpipers and bonfires. And I met Rayner and Flavin, and really loved all that energy. And for this place that was just, for me, very much about the ranch and the family and, roundup and all this kind of stuff. And which I never did. I was a city slicker living in El Paso, and now really a city slicker living in New York. But it connected these two, these things for me, which was really important. And, and as I learned more about, art, I studied installation sculpture. And then after college, I went to, actually I was an intern at the Peggy Guggenheim in Venice. I spent several months there. And my friend Evelyn Lambert, who was in her 80s, had this big villa outside of Venice, and invited me to stay there. And she took me up to see Count Panza's collection in Varese. So I got to go with her alone. This the two of us, me, 20-something, this 80-year-old woman who's incredible, like had been friends with Peggy Guggenheim and had, it was just legendary. But wandered around and saw my first sky space of Turrell, and saw Flavin, saw Ryman, Nauman. I mean, just like, I was really overwhelmed with this kind of moment of like being with it by myself and with this amazing woman. And in this context, it literally just blew my mind. And something shifted in me, and I said, art can be, you can really strip it down to much less. And immediately I stopped making these installation sculptures and all these things that had been much more narrative in a way, and thinking about how to strip it down. And then I ended up going to NYU to grad school and got immersed in technology. And it took me a long time to find my materials. But once I did, I remembered all these things, and I said, that's the kind of work that I'm interested in. So I would say, James Turrell is a huge inspiration, as is Flavin. But I would say my work really adds the digital very fundamentally into that. And in dealing with the lowest level of it, when I started with 0, which is off, and 1 is on, and starting to build things up from that very low level using a microcontroller and some lights. So starting to sequence the light is very important. And then dealing with time, because it's all about time for me, and the sequence of events. And so it's, it was, this very interesting journey, and I ended up sort of in the right place at the right time on several occasions, and had these things that really opened me up. And I did actually get to go and visit Roden Crater many years ago, probably 15 years ago, and was incredibly impressed. And James was there and he gave us a tour himself, and it was just really incredibly memorable. So yeah, I'm a great admirer of his work, and very exciting to see his use of digital technology and sequencing and programming and all this stuff. And so it's but it feels to me like the the West, like there is a lot to do in this terrain, and there's all sorts of things, and it's a very exciting time, because as artists and students and young people, or anybody, we have amazing access to tools that we've never had before to manipulate sound and image, and light, and all these things, which are accessible to everyone, plus a whole web to communicate with one another. We don't have to be physically in the same place. So it used to be very different when I was a student, where the machines I was using were $1 million supercomputers, and you had to really be in the right place to get onto that. Now you can just go, your iPhone has more power than those machines ever had. And so I just see it as an exciting time to be thinking about the future of art and what it could be. I just think, I hope that, I hope students at ASU and others are inspired by the work, and really start their own explorations.
That's Miki, you were talking about that night sky, which is so key. And I think that's one of the reasons that I had thought immediately of Leo too, because of the Southwest, the accessibility to the night sky, which is something James Turrell talks about all the time. We've forgotten, because we live in cities, of that those amazing points of light and the connection to the cosmos, which, Leo, a lot of your work has been about. But that idea of light, and of course James will talk about, you know, young light versus old light in the stars, because you can tell by the quality of light, the color of light, age, and the kind of incredible cosmological age. But there's also, which are kind of ones and zeros too, right? The stars are bit ones and zeros, but there's also thing about light, and there's this city light too, because just to use a James Turrell reference, he tells the story about when he was young and flew with his dad once over Los Angeles. In Los Angeles in those days, people burned their trash and it was like smoky during the day. And he would say, his dad said to him as they flew at night over the Great Basin of Los Angeles, you know, Los Angeles, peasant by day, princess by night, because as the points of light emerged, and we know that image, that all of a sudden this glowing. So it's not just about the sky, of course, it's about the city lights. And, you know, Dan Flavin, another friend artist I worked with, there's references in his work to that city light. Like his work was about city light. He references, you know, Ralph Ellison being in that, in The Invisible Man, the first scene of taking the power from New York City. And I kind of now I'm seeing this connection between those, the starlight that you grew up in and the city light that you're interested in, and light in all of its forms. I mean, when you went to Panza's place, you may have probably started, like he often did, in the dark room of Maria Nordman's, where it's darkness and then slowly light emerges. So light is also about darkness. Or one of our favorite artists from your home state, who painted in your home state, Agnes Martin, who somehow makes light emerge from no light from canvas. So you told us this story that I've heard about Burning Man. I'm not satisfied with that on just the inspiration for light, because I've asked so many of these artists about their interest in light itself, its meaning. I mean, I know we're hardwired for light. That's the neuroscience of seeing, and also light. We're talking about artists. I'm sitting in my dining room under Cuban-born Jorge Pardo's light, or my living room. I love light. So. Can you say more about that like inside you, the light and what it means to you? Because I know we're all hardwired, but not everybody decides to be an artist. Artists have always used light to illuminate, but it's a rare breed of artists who use the light itself as the subject of the work.
Yeah, I think, you know, I did grow up in with huge skies and sunsets and stars and all these things that you just sort of, that was just part of the landscape. And I think I was drawn to, you know, the urban environment, and I've been very interested in creating things in cities. And you know, like the Bay Lights in San Francisco is like the big public artwork that's, you know, 1.8 miles long, and
yes,
it activates the Bay Bridge, and that's been up since 2013 and become, you know, really quite iconic, and something that, you know, it for me, the exciting part is the public aspect of it, that you can have audiences of, like, you know, hundreds of millions, if not billions of people have seen the Bay Lights, and you can really start to activate places like that. And so it is riffing off the city lights, but it's also about the sky and the water and the atmosphere and all the things that are going on optically around the Bay Bridge, for instance. All those things feed and inspire the motion of it. So in a way, the piece becomes a mirror of the activity around it. Although I'm kind of avoiding using like a sensor and making it interactive, which people always ask me, is it responding to something? And I always, you know, I end up, you know, I was at the Maker Faire doing a talk, and to this very technical audience, and finally I had to say, I am a sensor. Artists are sensors. You know, certain things pass through and certain things don't, and decisions get made, and for whatever reason. And that's what art is, in a way, from a very technical point of view. So I was the one out there, you know, night after night for months on end, looking at, you know, the sky, the water, and kind of responding to it through the creation of these sequences. So when people see the piece, it really feels appropriate for its site because it was made for that location. And I think the site specificity is really, really important. So I think there's a lot of observation that happens, and I think the interaction of all these systems in nature are fascinating. And when I see the movement of water, I'll immediately think, wow, I want to ask my programmer how we can recreate that using our code. Because I am also not using, I'm not sampling things from nature. I don't take video of something and then display that on the pieces. I'm really creating it from the ground up on the pixel level. So that's another really important thing about it, is that it's really made in a very specific way. And I think because I got started with such a small amount of information, you know, you really had to work with what you had. And I love those constraints and those limitations, and then being able to find a way through that. So gradually we've been kind of, you know, working our way up. But I think, you know, there are times in which I'll be making a piece, and I made a series with these OLED panels recently that were very high resolution, and each panel had like 8 million pixels in it. And I was dealing with each individual node, and I started looking at these kind of radial formations that I was making and feeling like, well, I've seen something like this before. And found this Gustave Doré book on my shelf that was about, you know, illustrations of like Dante's Inferno. And these etchings had these hatchings and these marks and all this kind of stuff that really looked a lot like what I was seeing on these OLED displays, except, you know, in motion and changing. And so I think that these are really old ideas that artists have been thinking about forever, and trying to imagine these, you know, cosmic situations. And the show I just did in Palo Alto at Pace Gallery was called Harmony of the Spheres, right, which was, you know, there was no sound in the show. And you mentioned synesthesia early on, and right, that's something I've always been interested in. And I was actually in a show, visual music, that was at the Hirshhorn, and went to LA MoCA, and it was exciting to be in that show, which was kind of this alternate history of abstraction, which rolled in, you know, like the 60s light shows and all these special effects artists that were doing things, and things that people wouldn't even consider art, but are actually important parts of this history of abstraction. And you know, starting with Kandinsky. So I think a lot of the compositional methods that I use are similar to the way a musician might make sound, although I'm just making, you know, sequences of light. And I did some early sound pieces, and I've actually been thinking a lot about revisiting that. But it's, you know, that translation between the two is fascinating, and kind of exploring these kind of neurological conditions is something that I think is inspiring for a lot of artists.
Well, and also artists, and you've also mentioned, Leo, architects. So you sometimes have mentioned Barragan, Mexico, whose use of light is pretty famous, and Le Corbusier and others. So Predock is not the only architect that you've referenced before in terms of the play of light and shadow. Our building has a hashtag on Instagram, and we have the most gorgeous photographs from students and people just walking by, and they're just seduced by those plays of light and shadow. I imagine they'll be seduced by yours as well, but I think it's definitely has an architecture legacy as well.
Absolutely, you know, going to Teotihuacan, and, you know, climbing the pyramids, or going to the Yucatan, and you know, waiting for that moment on the equinox to see the snake kind of climb up the pyramid. And all that stuff is, you know, I kind of grew up looking at that, and it's interesting when you see these things kind of come back from things you don't really think about, and suddenly you kind of remember, oh yeah, because I actually didn't even remember going to Count Ponz's. And it wasn't until I was, you know, working with Joanne Northrup from the San Jose Museum, and we're working on my survey show, and she was writing this essay, and I started to think, oh yeah, this happened. And it was like, it's interesting that these things kind of penetrate, and then things you wouldn't think, you know, there was something that happened, but then it actually turns out to be really, really important. And you start to unpack it, you know, over your life, you know.
Yeah, I have one other area I just wanted to investigate a little bit, Leo, is I've seen your work inside museums. This is inside a museum, but kind of in a public space. Um, I'm virtually sitting in front of Urban Light, which Chris Burden's work in front of LACMA. I guess now the light theme in my own life, I'm starting to think about more talking to you, that I have the same obsession with that. And it's funny, Chris Burden on the plaque there is his little statement, and he says something about a great civilization, great city is beautiful to behold and safe after dark. And I remember Dan Flavin once saying to me when he did the Grand Central Station project that he was proud that he had improved the illumination for people. I get this feeling that you actually like, you don't have to say, but you like working in public space, in outside in these, you know, not always art conditions. This is a hybrid, I think, this building, this public space like Urban Light. I get this feeling that you really enjoy that people come upon it in public space. So I'm just interested in your own feelings about this idea of public space and public, and you know.
Yeah, I mean, my first public piece was in 2003. Alana Heiss asked me to do something at PS1. They were doing a construction project, and there was this scaffold around the building, and they said, "Could you do something with the scaffold?" And they, you know, I ended up being part of this. It was in conjunction with Signatures of the Invisible, which was a project that was artists collaborating with CERN and the particle accelerator. So it was already this kind of artists and scientists. And then I made this piece called Supercluster, and it was up for, actually the construction project kept getting delayed. So it was great for me because my piece got to stay up longer and longer. But the really interesting thing was, you know, the gas station attendant on Jackson Avenue, right there outside of PS1. You know, I'd see him all the time because I was out there working, and he says, "Oh, I saw something change," and he was really aware of the sequences that were changing, and it kind of blew my mind because I'm like, wow, this is someone who probably had never gone into PS1 or may never go into PS1, but here he was responding to the piece, and that got me thinking about just how important it is to get art out into the world. So we've done that, you know, with the bay lights on this huge scale. I'm working on this project in London called the Illuminated River, which is lighting several, you know, iconic bridges over the Thames. We've done 4 so far, and I'm going there in March to illuminate another 5. But again, yes, you're right. The audience is like people who may not know anything about art or anything about programming or any of these things where this work comes from, but you can look at it and have some sort of response. And I think, you know, I'm interested in those chance interactions and with the, you know, the city. You know, I just love cities and wandering, and a place like London, there's so much to work with. You know, so much history of, you know, Monet and Turner and Whistler and, you know, all the things that have gone on in, you know, in London, and specifically there on the Thames with its bridges. And so there's just a tremendous amount to work with. So we're dealing with these architectural constraints, and, you know, Westminster Bridge is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it's, you know, people are very cautious and they care deeply about these things, but we were able to receive 30 planning applications to do this project. And it really has taken these things that people have almost don't even see, they become invisible, but made them visible through this kind of simple gesture, and really kind of shifted things. So I like the simplicity of these gestures and how much impact they can have, because it's more than just illuminating a bridge. There's something else going on, and that's where the art part of it comes in, because I'm not a lighting designer, I'm not an architect. And people aren't quite ready for that, and they don't really have the slot in their brains for these things yet. But it's exciting. We have opportunities to do monumental public art on a scale that, you know, we've never really known. And I think that cities are ready to do this. And I think people in the world need, you know, things to bring them together in this kind of polarized time. So working literally with these bridges is something really powerful. And, you know, it takes on new meaning all the time, depending on what's happening. But I'm, you know, really excited to, you know, to change that landscape in a way that is, and it's not really about the ego of the artist. It's not about my piece. It's more about listening to them. Like, what is the site? What are the conditions? What was the historic illumination of the bridge? And what can I do that would kind of activate it in a way that is, is kind of brings it to life. And that's kind of one of the main things that I'm interested in.
Well, thank you too. We're going to turn it over to some questions and see what we've got here. So Leonard asks, when you're adjusting it, tweaking it, can you express what you're feeling as you approach getting it just right and feeling complete? So when does it feel done?
Well, yes, I'm engaging in a lot of, I'm really interested in concepts of emergent behavior and artificial life, which sounds complicated, but all it really means is setting up certain conditions and then letting something happen. So there's a lot of chance in the process because I don't know what's going to happen. But again, I like getting lost in these things and improvising. And you think you really wouldn't be able to do this with the software or technology, but you really can. And it's almost become like visual instruments that I'm using. And I make discoveries, and then I keep at it, over and over again. And when you find the same thing, you get to the same place multiple times from different ways. You kind of think, oh yeah, that's what this is, or this is what the piece should be. Oftentimes I'm on a deadline, so that's, you have to deal with that, and and trusting that the piece can happen within those constraints is something I've just gotten familiar with over time. But you just have to kind of like let it flow through you and you just have to kind of get out of the way and let it happen, and wait for those moments of surprise, which are really interesting to me. So that's sort of the process I go through.
Someone anonymously asked if you referenced Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey monolith, which I kind of love.
Actually, I was going to, that was one of my next, I have 1,000 other questions if we get to that, but I was totally on that saying like how 20th century was Stanley Kubrick, if only he could have seen that this was the obvious way the monolith should have been.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's definitely, I have that deeply embedded in my brain, and all the, the cinematography of, The Shining and those camera moves. And that was one of the really important things about this piece is how do you move through the space in a way that I didn't want it to feel like, when we first started looking at some of these experiments, it felt like, I didn't want it to feel like you were in a video game, because that sense of movement in a video game, it always feels like, that's not what I want. I was like, how do you sort of float? How can we float through and drift through in a certain way? And have it stay very kind of ephemeral, almost like you're a ghost or something. You're very kind of fleeting. But yes, I love the monolith, the Kubrick, but I think it was really thinking about where something could go in the building, and in a way to really respect the building and find a space. And I think there are all these amphitheaters and moments in which people can gather that's already there. But this seemed like a spot, and it seemed like the right dimension for it. And it's also, the piece is double-sided, so people can really gather around in kind of a unique way. But it's on axis, which I thought was really, really important, because the building is really, there's a lot going on. And I think, it'd be great to get, have a conversation with Antoine Predock and understand what was happening. And I hope that, he sees, I hope he sees the building in a new way. And I'm really, it's been exciting to be able to explore his work.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I see that we'll maybe just do some closing remarks. Someone wanted to know about security, because I know we talked about, it's outside exposed. So what are the measures we've taken? And also, how much did you manipulate the original point cloud from the camera? And also, were the moving portions inspired by anything else in particular?
Well, it is installed outside, but it's made out of very robust materials. We worked with a company called Surefire, who were great, who were just wonderful. And this is what they do. So it's been designed for this. It is in a museum and on the campus of ASU. So I'm imagining that it will be, it's going to be okay. But I've done a lot of public work, and I've always felt like people respect the work. And lots of times people could have vandalized things or destroyed things, and they haven't done it. So, I think we're good. I'm going to, err on the side of creating something that's accessible there for people all the time. Regarding the point cloud, it's a huge amount of data. And one of the challenges is how do you navigate through that data and make something out of it? So those were the tools that we developed, is how do you look at a certain portion of the point cloud and how do you deal with the resolution of it? And I have this ability to, brighten the points that were closer and dim the points that were further, and really create these, kind of landscapes through the building, and really isolate certain parts of it, which was very exciting in creating these paths through. And I think we just started with what would be an interesting path. And, you take one path and then you take another, and, you sort of keep going, and you might see the same path, but at a certain point, the points have been kind of quantized so that they're distributed more and they kind of blur out. And so it's very, it's pretty trippy, I have to say. This piece is definitely plays with that, the edge of perception, and where things are something and then they're not. And that's my kind of favorite space of kind of breaking things down. And so I hope that people will see that in the work.
And Michael and Leo, can you see the questions, the Q&A?
Yes, in the chat.
Because we've got a great comment by Antoine, and I thought maybe one of you could read it.
Let's see. I'm sorry, I don't see it.
It's in the
Oh yeah,
Q&A.
hey Leo, it's Antoine, our twin day quantum mechanics, ghost, spirit, disorientation, nanoscale. Am I allowed to say science? Fucking power, congrats, many exclamation points and a fist. So you have a response.
Well, thank you. I really, that's, something that, you do want to listen closely and respect, and that's something that's important to me, and that means a lot. And, so I'm happy to be able to have created this. And again, I'm just incredibly grateful to you all and honored.
Well, it's 6 o'clock, Michael and Leo. I'm going to let you have the last word. I'm going to thank everyone. Please come and visit us. Even despite COVID, you can come and still see this work, which is just amazing. So Leo and Michael.
I'm on my way. I'm flying there as soon as possible, drop in and see it. And Leo, it's really amazing to see the evolution of your work, and it's causing me to think about a lot of new things. So thank you. And Miki, amazing just that you have allowed this to happen, encouraged it, and I think this bodes well for all of our future collaborations in the art history program and Roden Creator, and working with artists to imagine many possible futures. So thank you both.
Yeah, I just again want to thank ASU, and you guys have been great to work with. And I thank my team. I do this, there's a lot of amazing people that work behind the scenes very hard on creating these things and managing them. And we, it's been even harder during this period, but we've been able to work together through all these challenges and to manifest this work. And there's, many, many stories. But I just want to express my gratitude to the team, and hope they feel a real sense of pride what we've done. And I personally can't wait to get to Arizona. So hopefully in the very near future.
We'll all meet there in real.
Yes.
3D, in 3D.
And we can have a celebration and a talk and all the things that we normally would do. And but it's great to be able to be together even in this format. And so thank you.
We need it more than ever, and we'll see everybody in the spring, hopefully, fingers crossed, for a lecture with Leo here in Arizona. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Leo.
Thanks, everyone, for
Thank
showing.
you, Miki.
Thanks, Antoine. And,
Thanks, Antoine.
good night. Good night, everybody.